Hey, welcome back to Unschooled Theology. I am your host, Derick. With me is the other host of this fine program, Evan. Hello, sir.
Hello. Good day to you, sir.
Indeed, good day. All right, we are diving into Genesis 2, 19 and 20. Now, out of the ground, the Lord God had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all livestock and to the birds of the heavens and to every beast of the field. But for Adam, there was not found a helper fit for him. To start with, real quick, it's not essential, I think, to the meaning of these couple verses in terms of how we're going to interpret, but it should be noted here that the question here, you could translate it, or it's been translated, let's put it that way, either God had formed or God formed. And that's kind of significant if one insists on a historical perspective of these verses. Because if the word had is not present, then the order of creation here is the inverse of what we saw in the previous chapter. Yeah. Because now we have animals being formed after man, where it was the opposite in the previous chapter. So that's interesting. And on that note, the majority of translations actually do not have the word had. And it seems to be primarily some of the more recent translations that have the word. So it does sort of leave one to wonder, is that an addition in order to be more consistent with a historical approach to these verses? I don't know. That's just something to consider, I think.
Which again, though,
the nature of this.
Well, and then I think it's important to go back to the previous and talk about this of if you're approaching this as a narrative structure, it is appropriate to have, in this context, the Lord God formed. So post the verse that we just read, and in the first narrative, it is more appropriate to God have man at the end of creation. We talked about in the first, and we've got an old episode on that, but we talked about man being the pinnacle of creation. So there's a build up towards
all
man,
of creation builds towards man.
Yes. In this context, just due to the narrative structure, God presents this this problem. It's not good that man should be alone. And in response to that problem, God makes animals. God makes every beast of the field, every bird of the heaven. And
well, in the broader narrative of everything we've seen so far, it's like if the first chapter was climbing the mountain to man, right? And we're sort of seeing creation all being built up and leading to man. Here, we're almost climbing down the mountain from man, and we're sort of seeing creation, as sort of spinning out from what man is, right? Because you get the creation of man, and then you're introduced to the garden and the trees and all of that, right? The vegetation and everything. So it's
really, really good art and really good creation and really good music has this fundamental nature to it. So let's take a piece of music by Bach, and you have the introduction, or even just the genre of a fugue. You have the introduction of a melodic line, and then you have the introduction of a melodic line that's either the same or coincides with that, and it builds. And then another one that builds around that, and another one that builds around it. And this structure is built out from that one melodic line. And then it also comes to the end, and it ends typically on one, maybe two notes ending in unison. And so there's this way in which that's the way thought works. That's the way creation works. That's the way beautiful things function, is they have this singular concept that builds out into complexity and comes back to that singular concept.
Well, even just question answers. We start with one question. We start with a question. And then we think of all of these world of possibilities of answers and all the things that could influence the particular answer. And then we try to sort of carve those things away until we get to an answer to the question.
Exactly.
At least in terms of like philosophy, that's more or less what you do, So
if you're not clung to that strict historical perspective in this context, you can look at this and say, look, maybe this dual narrative that we always have an issue with. Maybe this makes the most sense for how God actually created the earth.
Yeah.
And saying that,
Yeah.
look, drop your preconceptions about time for a sec, because if you're going to say God's outside of time, you can drop those, and you can say, look, more accurate to display it as God puts man at the center of creation and then builds around him, but also in a strange way, he builds inward towards man at the same time.
Right.
And that's a far more, maybe that is the most accurate way for God to have presented creation to humanity, is to say, look, I can't explain it to you because you're stuck in time. But that's the best way to think of how man is created. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's I mean, maybe it's fitting. It's similar to, I think, how you would sort of create a garden. You create a garden, you have some idea of what the centerpiece of the garden is going to be, and you're building sort of out from that centerpiece as well as from the outer boundaries of the garden inward as well, right? Mm-hmm. You're sort of making it all meet together, but it's all, in service of that centerpiece, right? And that's what we see in that
process, you have to ask which one did you create first, the outer or the inner, or it's hard to even say.
Yeah.
There's not a clear response to that question. It's not, you can't say, yeah, I started here and went here and here and here. It's like, yeah, if you're stuck by time, you can.
But it was all about that centerpiece.
Exactly.
That's what matters.
That's what's significant. If you're conceptualizing it, you're not conceptualizing it one after the other after the other. It's this vague idea that's getting conglomerated, which is far more accurate to what ordering looks like.
Right.
That's interesting. Cool.
Yeah. So, all right. In these verses here, I want to point out once again, we see the importance of naming, which we saw in the previous chapter. And we talked about it then, but the idea that in the ancient world, and frankly, I think even more recently than that, when we think of the idea of explorers discovering new lands and naming them, that there's naming something signified a kind of ownership and responsibility over that thing. It was an authority, an ownership, it tied you to a thing when you named something. So in these verses, what we're seeing in the human playing almost a collaborative role with God in terms of animals and their place in the earth, is God is forming them and man is naming them. It's like this dual partnership almost with God. In that we see man being placed sort of hierarchically above animals in the grand order of things. That's what we see here in this. However, this brings us to what may be a bit of a tangent. However, it is by far the most interesting part to me of these two verses. There's a curious absence from this verse, and that is creatures that dwell in the waters. We're told about the livestock, the beasts of the land, which we talked about previously in chapter 1, sort of the significance of the beasts of the land not being included and then later be included in another verse. We get the birds of the air here, but the water creatures are not included. And that's interesting to me. I mean, we could look at it and say, oh, well, they must have been included. They just weren't named here, right? However, I think that idea would clash very much with the nature of these stories, where I think every detail appears to be very carefully chosen, and every detail serves a function. There is in these stories, I think there is neither a wasted word nor a absence of words without a reason for that. However, when it comes to this, I have to admit, I don't quite know exactly what to think of the absence of the water creatures. It's kind of captured my imagination, and I have a number of different ideas, but I wouldn't claim a sense of certainty around any of them. It's fascinating to me. What I take from this, though, I take a few different things. So I'll just talk about here where my mind is swirling around with this, with the nature of the waters and some things we might pull out from this verse. I think there is something mysterious, right? In, the biblical description of the waters here. However, as well as with the waters of this world itself, if you listen to people talk about how little we actually understand our own oceans, it's very interesting. There's a lot of mystery left down there still to be uncovered. And if we think about this, just objectively speaking, the idea that man has some kind of authority over the waters or creatures within them, it's kind of a hard case to argue. And naturally speaking, we aren't particularly adept at moving within waters, right? All of the creatures that are in water seem to move around within it much better than we can. It's just, we're not good at it. And in fact, when we enter a large body of water, more so than anywhere else on Earth, I think it really does feel like you're entering something else's domain, right? It's like, I'm not in charge here. Like I feel confident on land. Once I enter here, there are a lot of things that are, above me in this domain in terms of their control of this landscape, or waterscape, I guess. And even it's interesting to me that our claims of ownership are based entirely around land, right?
Mm-hmm.
We like
economically. You mean economically?
Economically, legally, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We like land rights.
Yeah. We extend them an arbitrary distance into the waters, right? But anything beyond that's considered international waters owned by no one.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. And we have no nations, right, that exist, on the claim of a certain patch of the ocean alone. It's like this circle within the ocean, this one's ours, I mean, islands, sure, but just a circle of ocean, no, nothing, no such thing. There are people who have theorized that we might one day be able to do such a thing by creating cities on the water. But I think even that, right, even the times that humanity, goes to the water, we're bringing land with us, right? We create boats or rafts or, a floating city or whatever. It's like we're transporting land on top of the water. It's still not even like ownership or really like claiming the water in the way that you can do with land. And that to me is interesting. We have no ability to sort of claim it. We're not particularly at home on the water. It's easily the most dangerous place on Earth for us, right? In terms of lives lost per hour spent on in either land or water. If you really were to think about those numbers, why ever leave land, actually? Like your odds of dying anywhere near the water are significantly higher. Or if you think about the idea of being stranded someplace, right? If I said all you know is that you'll be stranded at sea or stranded on land, you don't know where on land, but it's going to be one or the other. No one's going to choose the sea. Everyone's going to choose land. I'll take my chances in the Sahara Desert over being at sea and being stranded at sea. So, it's just clearly, it seems to me that humans, we don't really have an authority over the waters in the way we do things on land. It's like we can go into them and we can do things with them and we might use them to our ends, but it's not the same thing. Whereas on land, we have some sort of like domain there, and so it sort of leaves me to wonder then, especially in light of a verse like this, who in fact is the authority over the seas? Where does that come from? Obviously God, right? But God's also the authority over land, right? Yeah. So it leaves one to wonder, is there an equivalent of humans steward the land and our domain? Is there something equivalent of that to the sea? And I don't know that we could know the answer to that question, short of God revealing it to us and giving us the answer. But I find the idea interesting, and I have something of a theory to that end on what might be happening there.
Yeah.
that for entertainment's sake,
Yeah.
I'll just bring it up here. It's because it's poorly thought through. It's just things I've thought about.
Mhm.
And that is that since I've sort of thought about this idea and thought more about the oceans and learned about them and research, there's something to me very interesting and unique about the role that orcas play within ocean ecosystems. And I know that seems out of left field, right? But this has to do with research and discovery. Every year, we're learning more and more and more about what orcas do within the water, and even their intelligence level, which seems to be beyond that of even dolphins, although they belong to the same family. They are fascinating, and they do some things that are particularly odd behavior for which there's no explanation, because it is so different than what we would have expected based on the actions of all other animals that exist. And the effects of that behavior are even more interesting. So they do this behavior that's weird, but then the trickle-down effects of that behavior are just completely fascinating. And if one squints at this and considers all of it, you start to realize that if you're talking about the role of stewardship above all the creatures of the ocean, what orcas do is actually almost exactly the behavior you would expect to see. Mm-hmm. It's very odd. So I wouldn't go so far as to say that's exactly what's happening. But it's just something that I'm interested in, paying attention to. I think there's some potential in that. So
the orcas could be the stewards.
I think so. Yeah. I think that's possible. I have a book over here, actually. One second. I have this book. This is interesting. Of Orcas and Men, which is what killer whales can teach us. And it's actually the idea of the book is looking at recent research and some things like that. It talks about the nature of orcas and how there's a lot of strange similarities between the behavior of orcas compared to humans versus all the rest of creatures in the water.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I don't know. Does it warrant an example?
Do you think? Yeah, of course it does.
Okay.
Do you think orcas have names for all the sea creatures?
Names for, you know what? We are just discovering in terms of their language that it's broader and more intricate than we might have ever thought. Different pods have different languages.
Yeah,
they have their own languages. Like which no other animals have their own unique languages.
Yeah.
And they have that, yet can come together with other pods and speak a shared language.
Interesting.
Too. And so and they pass these songs on to each other. And I don't know that we have been able to identify that, they're using a name for anything specific. I don't think we're able to necessarily pinpoint that. Maybe one day we will be able to pinpoint that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I guess as an example of this strange behavior, it was only, I think, 2-3 decades ago now that we saw the first instance of a great white shark being attacked by killer whales. And prior to that point, it was thought that the great white shark is an apex predator and nothing can kill it.
Yeah.
But there was video footage, I think it was off the coast of California, of a great white shark being hunted down and attacked by the whales. And the whales had figured out, sharks do a weird thing where when you flip them upside down, they just go completely passive. It like hypnotizes them or something in their brains, and they don't struggle. They just lay there.
Yeah.
There are tours where you can pet sharks and whatnot that they do that thing to them. Humans can, rub the belly of a shark. The whales had figured out how to do this, and we're communicating with each other enough to flip the shark over. But what gets really interesting, and there's been a couple other instances where people have observed this with orcas since then, is they eat the liver of the shark, which makes sense, it's nutrient dense, and then leave the body. And this is not what predators do. Predators in the wild, they eat until they're full, and then whatever they leave, scavengers come and get.
Yeah.
Right? But with this shark thing, it's really weird. They eat the liver. That's not enough for a meal for them. Not at all. They're going to have to go find some fish or something else to eat too to get a full meal. But they leave the body, and scavengers don't come along and eat it too, which is interesting, which would probably indicate that this is not something that happens very often. Otherwise, there would be scavengers developing up around it. But they've observed now a fascinating discovery that when a shark gets eaten by killer whales this way and is left to decompose, it appears that something about that decomposition process sends off maybe a smell in the water or something that keeps other great white sharks away from that area for a long time. And getting to the downstream effects of that, there was a place somewhere in the Pacific where they actually did great white shark tours regularly to go and let people see great white shark tours. And it was near some islands, and there was a few seals and birds in the area, and there was some fish, but not a whole lot. And one of these boats saw orcas killing great white sharks. And this was obviously a very great white dense area if you're doing tours. And they had apparently killed a couple of them. And since then, I mean, that the great white shark tours have dried up because there's no great white sharks to see. But the effect of that is the nearby islands has seen a sudden regrowth in the population of the birds and the seals and the fish in the waters around the area. The whole ecosystem has built back up. And to me, when you look at something like that, that seems remarkably similar to what we as humans might do with like wolves that are over hunting and have sort of, there's too many of them now, and they're sort of taking down a whole local ecosystem because as the apex predator, there's now so many of them that they're just eating up all the food sources, and it's destroying that ecosystem. And in a weird way, what the whales did is almost the exact same thing as what we do with the wolves in terms of allowing an ecosystem to restore. So it's not that I don't know that they're consciously doing this or not. I have no idea, right? But it's just functionally, it's very interesting to see how similar a thing it is.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I have a totally different perspective on this verse.
Nice.
I don't know if it's.
Oh, let's do it.
I don't think it's going to be as lengthy. Well,
on that issue, the absence of sea creatures. Yeah.
I guess this is an area rich for speculation, I suppose.
Well, it is. I mean, the absence of something naturally is going to lead to thought in that way.
I think my perspective though is actually could coincide with yours. It's more directed to why is man not allowed to do that, as opposed to who might be filling that role.
Right, yeah.
Because
that makes sense.
The question I have is, or what does the ocean represent to man? And you talked about the unknown, and we've talked about a while ago when we talked about the creation of waters and things like that, is that it represented chaos. And that it represented
and the edges of
vast area of unknown and vast area of things. And it feels like to me, this is God saying to man, know the things that you have dominion over. Know the things that you have control over. These are the things you're responsible with naming. And those other things you're not.
Right.
That is the realm that you are not intended to be. And whether it's being ordered or not, I guess is a matter of question. But the area of chaos, at least from man's perspective, is not for man to oversee.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So there are parts of creation that were intended to be the ones who are ordering here. And there maybe are parts of that were not intended to name, you know?
Right.
That could be something that's being conveyed here as well. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to take that from that. And then of course, downstream of that would come to the question of, well, is anyone doing that?
Is that being ordered? Is that ordered territory that man doesn't order? Like that's not man's responsibility.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Is that process still going on? I don't know. That's it's just the absence is fascinating. There's a lot there for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So one last thing to take away from these verses is, of course, that amongst all these creatures, there was not a single one that was adequate to provide the help that man needs in his task. That's not unsurprising because the task of subduing the earth is given just to man. So that's not a shock or humanity, more appropriately. This also, and this fact that there wasn't an adequate helper there, I think reinforces again the idea of man being above the animals, right? Because to assist in the task of subduing the earth, you would need a creature that is at least on the same level, if not above. That's who can assist in the ordering. If you're below, you're being ordered, if that makes sense. You're part of what's being ordered. If you
see this weird dynamic. Let's give an office analogy, I guess. The office analogy. There's you see this situation. This might be an old one, so we'll refresh people on characters.
I hate to tell you, the Office is old. Thankfully, it's still popular, but it's still popular.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't know if everybody has seen it. So you have this individual who's the manager and has that title, manager of the office. And so very clearly has a delineation in terms of the structure of that place. And when he says, even though he's dopey and ridiculous and funny, he for all intents and purposes, he can command people to do whatever he sees fit. And
he's follow the top of the hierarchy within that.
Exactly.
System.
And then he has somebody who's Dwight, who likes to claim the title of assistant regional manager, or which is made of joke a lot, assistant to the regional manager.
Right.
And the more accurate title that's drilled in over and over again is he's not the assistant regional manager. It's not a real title. He's assistant to the regional manager.
Right.
And so this means when Michael leaves, they always make jokes as who's in second command. There's nobody second in command, although he likes to pretend to. So Dwight will oftentimes try to say, you do this, you do that, you do this. And nobody responds. Right. Nobody follows up. Nobody does it because he doesn't actually have power. He's not actually separated in terms of the structure of the company. And so this would be an example where, going back to the animals, any animal that would have been selected would have been assistant to the regional manager, meaning they would not be power. Yeah, it isn't actually some sort of thing. And so what you need is you could have
sheepdogs are a great assistant to the regional manager.
Exactly,
but they're not the assistant regional manager.
Exactly. So that's I think that presents the idea. That's the difference in structure going on here.
So what that tells us though is the help must be found elsewhere. And so we'll get to that in the next episode. And until then, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, rate, review, all those kinds of things. If you want to tell me, I don't know, fun facts about orcas, or the fact that you think I'm nuts when it comes to orcas, be sure to email us. If you have other
candidates.
Yeah. Let us know.
Other candidates for the humans of the ocean. I like that.
Yeah, if you're big on octopi and you believe they're the stewards of the ocean, make the case. That'd be interesting to hear. Email us though with those thoughts at unschooltheology@protonmail.com, and we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.